Here is Anne Fry presenting the keynote at the Sjogren Syndrome National Patient Conference in Washington, D.C. in April of 2013.
I have some major premises, by the way, I just want to tell you as we start this. The first one is that you are not your body. These are some of my belief systems, and I'll be going into them in more detail. You are not your body. You might feel like you're your body, but you're not your body. What are you? Your mind. You're everything else, and we'll look at that. It's important to remember that you're not your body. Tend to your mindset regularly. It's your mind and the talk and the things that go on and the chatter of your head that are the things you really want to tend to. Be wary of the comparison game. You know how when you have something wrong with you, you always think it's worse than everybody else? Well, maybe it's not. And if you think it's worse, then it is going to be worse. And if you take the position that it's worse, that even if somebody has it easier than you do, they're always going to wonder what it's going to be like if it gets worse for them. So just avoid the comparison game completely and realize that your experience is your experience, their experience is their experience, and you don't have to overgeneralize as to whether yours is like theirs or theirs is like yours. For the women in the room who have had a baby, raise your hand. Anybody tell you when they were pregnant about how bad it was and what you should watch out for? Really? Didn't that help? Not. Right? Illness is a state of mind. It really is. We all know people with extreme illnesses, and they lived more during the time of that illness because they had the state of mind to keep themselves centered in a different way. And you are the director of your life. Nobody else but you. So I really wanted to make sure you got that. So who am I to talk to you about all this? So you already know that one of the things that we have in common is that we've shared an illness for many of us. I've had cancer. How many of you have had cancer in the room? Wow, very few, considering the numbers, which we'll go into in a minute. So we've shared an illness together. But other than that, I'm an ordinary woman. I'm not a celebrity. I know you've had celebrities speak here before. Sometimes those are big shoes for me to step into, but I'm not. I'm ordinary. I was living by myself, 63 years old at the time. I don't have a cook. I didn't have a bottle washer. I didn't have a chauffeur. I didn't have a personal trainer. I didn't have a husband to turn to on the other pillow and say, honey, can you get me? Just an ordinary person living in New York City, the most expensive city in the country. And I went through it. And the overarching message of that is if I could do that, then anybody could do that. Because it was amazing to me that I could do that. And as I talk through some of that, you'll see what that was like. The other thing that really qualifies me to talk about all this is on the professional side. So initially, I went to school to be a social worker. Any other social workers in the room? Therapists, psychotherapists. So I was a psychotherapist for 20 years, and I did a lot of work with people in various stages of illness, death, dying issues. I ran a volunteer hospice in my community. I trained all the hospice volunteers. I lost a lot of family members, supported family members in their own journeys through cancer, and then I've had my own. So it gives me a lot that I can say to you from a lot of different perspectives. So we're going to start to look through the slides now, and we're going to see what they have to say that might be fun to offer you. You ready? And periodically I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to ask you to share something at your table with other people, because you can be involved and not have to just listen to me. All right. So first was the adventure with the big C, and then was the Sjogren's adventure. And we're going to go through them a little bit at a time. This is what life before was like. If you see what my hair looked like, it was spiky, it was frosted. It was actually my brand. On my business cards, there were pictures of that. And people hired me for speaking sometimes to say, aren't you the one with that hair, with that kind of spiky, frosted hair? Everybody knew me that way. And the scariest thing to me about getting cancer was when I thought, oh my God, I'm going to lose my hair. Which, of course, I did. I wrote the book, 60 Sexy, Sassy, and Free. There it is. And that was life before cancer. But obviously, somebody had a big joke to play because Plan B had to come into operation because Plan A was no longer working. Sell the book? I didn't get a single speech to talk about the book. I didn't have a clue how I was going to do that. I couldn't expect any speaking engagements. I couldn't accept them. First of all, I had to know I was going to live, right? Then I had to know that I would be able to travel. So Plan B, completely in action. I decided that the best way that I could deal with having this major illness was by approaching it through the eyes of a researcher. How many researchers do we have in the room, besides the couple at this front table? We have a few. The fascinating thing about research, right, is that you look things up, you figure out why they are the way they are, and you figure out how to handle them from the information that you learn about them. So since I'd never had cancer before, I thought, I'm going to approach all of this through the eyes of this curious little kitty and see it as something to be curious about. Because that was a totally different mindset. Because otherwise, my head was jabbering. Oh my God, what are you going to do? What if they find more? Oh my God, what does chemotherapy look like? Do they give you pills? Do they put things in your arm? How are you going to survive? Are you going to have any bad reactions? Oh my gosh, what's it going to be like? And, and my head was going jabber, 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 jabber. When I decided that I would go through with a sense of curiosity and see what would happen next, made all the difference in the world. How many of you have been able to do that with Sjogren's? Put on your curiosity hat and say, I'm going to approach this in that way. Does it make a difference? It really does, right? Because then you don't have the preconceived notions. And even though you look at the diagrams and you look at all the things that it can cause, it's not going to cause that for everybody. So you don't know how it's going to be for you. So I urge you to wear your curiosity hat. So there's chemo number 1. Somebody gave me a little pink bear to take with me, so I had him on my seat. And there I am, hooked up. And I gotta tell you, chemotherapy number 1 was horrible. I had a terrible reaction. Chemotherapy number 2 was horrible. I had a terrible reaction. Do you think I wanted to go back to chemotherapy number 3? I don't think so, but I did. But meanwhile, right after that, 10 days after that, actually 12 days after that, they told me I would lose my hair. I woke up one morning, I went like this. It all started to come out. I called my son's best friend, an actor in New York. His name is John. He said, I'm coming over with my buzzer. He showed up on Monday evening with his buzzer. And he said, we're going to empower you by taking off your hair yourself. And we did. We had a great party of it. I had all the support I needed. John was there. He was working on my head. Patrick was there. He's my son's other best friend, who's an actor. My friend Deborah was there holding my hand. We played Pretty Woman in the background. We played it about 10 times, looping it, because it took a long time to shave that head, right? And then we had our sense of humor intact, because halfway through he gave me this mohawk. Pretty Woman was still playing loud. So you want to make a difficult situation fun and have a sense of humor. These are tips for you, and they're all on a piece of paper on your table. Tips from Anne. So you'll be able to look at that later. You don't have to follow up right now, but you'll be able to look at it. The deed was done. There I was, horrified to say the least. How many of you have ever lost your hair or had to have it shaved off? Wow. Did I see one hand? It's not fun. It's pretty disconcerting for men as well as for women, because men don't wear wigs. So, they've got to figure out one of those little caps to put on, or they've got to have the bald look. And women, well, the next day I remember putting on that little skull cap or a scarf and walking out of the apartment shaking in my shoes because everybody would know. Once they saw me with one of those scarves on, everybody would know. And I walked down the street with my mouth quivering, thinking, oh my gosh, everybody's going to know now that I have cancer. So, time passed. I finished chemotherapy. Actually, I had 2 surgeries before that, 2 surgeries, 4 chemotherapies, 7 weeks of radiation, by the way. Lived on the west side of New York, went to a hospital on the east side of New York, took a bus across town every single day, 1 hour across town, had a zap, 1 hour back on the bus, took at least 2 to 2.5 hours of my day every day in the winter. So how's that for one of those stories, walk through the snow to get to school with no shoes on and blah, blah, blah. It was really like that. It was winter, there was a lot of snow that year, and I did it. And I did it gratefully, actually, because I knew that in the process of doing that, I would be getting better. So you do what you need to do. I was still pretty unclear about what was going to happen after that. It's like confused, lost, lots of uncertainty. It was just, that's where I was. And then maybe about 5 months after all of the treatment was over, I had the courage one day to leave my apartment and to go to a networking group with some people that I knew. I hadn't been doing anything professional. Let me tell you, the scariest thing for me about all, besides losing my hair, was how I was going to support myself. I wasn't making money. I wasn't speaking. I had a few coaching clients. It's like, wow, what am I going to do here? Who am I going to pull upon? But I said, okay, I got to get back to work. I got to get back to work. So I pulled myself out with that little bit of hair that I had that was kind of curly and funny in the very beginning. And I walked out into the light thinking, what will they think? What will they say about me? Well, you know what? I guess life gets better. They were happy to see me. They gave me big hugs. And it turned out pretty fine that day. And what I wished for myself through that whole process, and what I wish for you on the process that we're about to talk about, the Sjogren's process, was to be in the journey. Instead of kicking and screaming and denying and fighting, just be in the journey. You can't avoid it anyhow, right? You have it. You're on it. It's that trip that you're on whether you want it or not. So be in it. Experience it. And to be open to whatever happens without any kind of attachment. You know how in Buddhist philosophy they practice non-attachment, not being attached to the outcome. The more you can put yourself in that space, the better off you are. Because if you get attached to feeling better, guess what? After my first surgery, they called me up and said, good news, bad news. I said, what's that? They said, the good news is you didn't have any lymph node involvement. The bad news is your tumor was a lot bigger than we thought, so we have to go back in and do another surgery. I was pretty attached to having it done after one time. I didn't like them going back in 10 days later, reopening the same incision. Go forward without attachment to what the outcome will be, because that way you're not disappointed either way. What's the right question to ask yourself when you are diagnosed with an illness? WNM, what does that mean? Why not me? The first thing we go to is, why me? Well, why not you? If you look at the statistics, Time Magazine recently said that 1 out of every 3 women will get cancer in her lifetime, and 1 out of every 2 men will get cancer in their lifetime. And we add to that the statistics that we know about Sjogren's and so many other things. Why not you? What would make you think that if you were not part of that 40%, that you wouldn't have that disease? So what happens when you say, what not me, as opposed to why me? It's much more empowering, isn't it? Much more. So, my 2 major cancer learnings. Humility. I learned to be incredibly transparent. I learned to be vulnerable, not that I wasn't before, but in an even deeper way. And I really learned how to ask for what I needed. My friends back in Austin, because they were far away and they couldn't help me very much, they thought it would be great if they could find a way to help. So they set up a grocery fund with Fresh Direct, a grocery delivery company in New York, and they had groceries delivered to me. They had like $1,000 in there, and I got to eat great food for about months and months and months. And for me to accept that took great humility, because I've always been, extremely independent and sassy. So it was a great learning for me. So thriving in 1 year, this is the new normal. This is how my hair was. I decided I wasn't going to put any dye in my head anymore. God, I had cancer. What do I want dye in my head for? So I went with this new normal look. Or so I thought it was new normal. What I didn't realize was there was something else going on under the surface. I was having symptoms. I got the same story as everybody else. Whether the symptoms were there before the cancer, I can't remember, but certainly a lot of them. And I think we thought a lot of the symptoms were relative to everything I've gone through with chemotherapy and radiation. But finally, one night in December of 2010, I ended up in the hospital because I tried to stand up and one leg gave way and I completely went down. I called my son's friend John. He took me to the ER. They said, we don't know what's wrong with you. I said, well, let's find out. They did every test in the world. They couldn't find anything wrong with me, but I couldn't put any weight on that leg. And they finally sent me home 4 days later with a walker, with a prescription for physical therapy. They said, start figuring this out. I went to every doctor. I went to a back doctor. I went to a neurologist. I went to this. I went to that. Just like you. And I finally found a rheumatologist that said, you know what? As you describe all your symptoms, I think perhaps you have something called Sjogren's, which of course I'd never heard of. How many of you had heard about it before you had it? Hardly any, right? Not very many. So what has Sjogren's taught me? It's taught me a few things. First of all, taught me I'm not losing my mind. Anybody realize that when they were finally diagnosed that they weren't losing, losing their minds? Because people would say, you're crazy, there's nothing going on, what do you think, all that. I also said to myself, I was going to keep on asking until I figured out what it was. So I figured that out. Keep on asking until you find the answer. That's a good idea for anybody's life, correct? Keep on asking until you find the answer. Be persistent, be perseverant, don't give up. You get closer and closer all the time. If we had a longer time for me to talk today, I would be telling you stories about how being perseverant pays off. Have a dictionary handy. I don't know about you, but I listened to everybody today. Hey, docs, I listened to everything you said. If I didn't have a dictionary, I wouldn't know what anybody was, or anything was, or what anybody was saying. It taught me to be really practical and to figure out what's going on. I'm a pretty smart person, but I really needed to have a dictionary handy. Do whatever it takes to feel the way you want to feel. What does that mean? Turn to somebody at your table and say, I want to do whatever it takes to feel the way I want to feel. And what does that mean? Just turn to them for a second. Is pretty clear. Who's it up to for you to feel as good as you'd like to feel? Right? It's up to you, correct? Because nobody else knows what you want if you don't know. So do whatever it takes to feel the way you want to feel. Be in charge. Empower yourself in that way. And laugh as much as you possibly can, because we all know that laughter is the best medicine. Acceptance. Until we move into acceptance, we find ourselves really resisting and fighting and denying and pushing off. The beauty about coming to some kind of acceptance and coming to that place that says it is what it is you actually get to relax into it. You get to lean into it rather than resisting it. Because you know what you resist persists and it gets harder and harder. So moving into acceptance is a great place to be. And when all else fails, go for the chocolate. I mean, it works for me every time. If I don't have chocolate around, right? Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about the distinction that I made between surviving and thriving. I know this is a little difficult to read. I took a snapshot of it, placed from straight on a website called thevisualthesaurus.com. Visual thesaurus. So you put a word in, and then it gives you all these other words that it means. And you get a really visual hit in a pretty kind of way. So surviving, I don't like the term surviving. I don't like being called a cancer survivor. I don't want to think I'm surviving with Sjogren's. Because that says things to me like I'm enduring, I'm succumbing, I'm putting myself through something, I'm subsisting. Not very empowering words. Would you agree? Surviving for me is like surviving the Holocaust or surviving a terrorist event or surviving an accident. This is not surviving. Let's look at another way to look at it. Pain is a part of life, but how it impacts you is up to you. How many of you already know that you have ways that you can control the way you feel when it comes to pain? And I don't just mean meds. Find those alternative things that help you with your pain and wrap your mind around some way that you can feel pain-free, or if not pain-free, less pain. No comparing, I said that in the beginning. If you find yourself comparing, make yourself better, not worse. Don't make yourself the worst person, because it hurts the other people around you and it gives you no hope. And thrive. Thriving is the next word. Thriving is all about booming and roaring and prospering and flourishing. It's a much stronger word, don't you think? Much more empowering. How many of you are thriving with Sjogren's? How many of you have not tried that out yet? How many of you remember a man named Randy Pausch? Do you know who he was? He wrote a book called The Last Lecture. He was this professor, I think in Massachusetts, right? What school was that at? Carnegie Mellon? Okay. He was a professor at Carnegie Mellon. He developed pancreatic cancer quite young. This was only a couple of years ago. And he had the most incredible, extraordinary way of expressing himself despite the fact that he knew he was going to die from pancreatic cancer. He had young children and a beautiful wife. He would go on stage, as weak as he was, and he would do handstands. And he would talk about how beautiful his family was. And he wrote the last lecture when he finally realized he couldn't continue working. He wrote the last lecture and delivered it to the student body about how beautiful life was and how much he loved life and how he loved life even in the eyes of dying. And then that book was published and made a lot of money to take care of his wife and children. But he taught us how to thrive even in the midst of being so sick. How many know who Stephen Hawking is? Right? Stephen Hawking has no mobility, no potential to move on his own. He puts an instrument in his mouth so that he can hit keyboards and do everything. And yet he's a prolific writer, an incredible scientist. He's thriving even in the midst of difficult times. So I am a thriver. That's a website I created not too long ago. Go check it out when you have a chance. IamAthriver.com, because it's all about how are you thriving. Are you resilient? Do you bounce back? Or do you allow your illness to keep you from bouncing back? Not giving up. Being a thriver is about not giving up. I bet everybody here is on the search for how you're going to feel better and not giving up, or you wouldn't be sitting in the seats here, am I right? But how many of you have known people that give up? A lot, right? And I know many of you are not able to work anymore. I'm extremely blessed that I'm able to work, but it's only because I work for myself. If I had to get up every morning and get on the subway and be at work at 8:30 and work till 5:30, I probably wouldn't be able to do that. But because I can get up and I can be in my pajamas and I can coach people by phone and I can search around and I can be in communication with people that way, the only times I really have to leave are to go to a meeting or to go speak to a group like this. So I know that I can work for myself and nothing stops me from doing that. And I have to anyhow because I don't have somebody else who's going to take care of me financially. So it keeps me really prospering, as it would say, and thriving. Thriving is about being, how many of you think you're a victim of this disease? Great. Because you're not. It is what it is. Can you say it is what it is? Can you say it better than that? It is what it is, right? It is what it is. Thriving is about being lively and spirited and full of life despite what else might be going on. When I had my baby and he was approaching that 7-month mark and I knew my younger brother was going to die of cancer any day, do you think that my sadness for my brother dying kept me from thriving in my interactions with my baby? I learned to separate and compartmentalize, and we can all do that when we need to do that. So right now I want you to stand up just for 1 minute. Stand up, turn to someone next to you and say, here's how I am thriving. And then turn to a second person and say, here's how I am thriving in my life. Slowly and deliberately. You take it in through your nose and out through your mouth. And if you do that 3 times, in, out, 3 times, it will slow down your heart rate. If you're anxious and panicked, it will calm you. Believe me, there are plenty of days that I have to do that. Plenty of days that I have to do that. You cry when you have to. Nobody says you can't cry. Nobody says you can't acknowledge that you're in pain or that you're uncomfortable or that you're scared or that you're worried. Nobody says that. I'm not saying that. The secret is not to do it for a long time. Because the longer you cry, you feel better or worse? Worse. Some people feel a little bit of relief initially, but the longer you go, I don't know about you, but I can't breathe because my nose gets all stuffed up, my eyes are burning, my throat's, it's like I feel miserable if I cry too much. So only cry for a little while. Ask for what you need. How many of you are single and live by yourself? Do you ask your friends, your other family members, whoever you have, do you ask for the help that you need? Go like this. And for those of you that are in relationships and have a loved one that you live with, are you still not asking enough for what you need? Think about that. Because maybe you don't want to burden your partners. Ask for what you need. If you don't ask, guess what? They don't know. Meditate. How many people meditate? Awesome. I meditate at least 15 minutes every morning. It's something I left out of my life and I recently added back, and it makes a huge difference to start my day that way. Start a gratefulness journal. Start writing down every day what you have in your life that you're grateful for. It's easy to focus on what you don't like and what's not working, but if you take a moment to think about what you're grateful for, that's very empowering as well. Be good to yourself. If you want to go for a ride on a beautiful afternoon, go for a ride. If you want to go for a walk in the park, go for a walk in the park. If you can't go very far, go as far as you can go. If you want to I live near Central Park. If I want to rent a boat and go out on the lake, I'll take somebody else to row for me maybe, but I'll go out on the lake. Do what it is that you want to do. Do I have a lot of money? No, I don't. But occasionally I treat myself to a good Broadway show because I live in New York and I have to, because that's part of thriving for me. So be good to yourself. And did I mention plenty of laughing and smiling? And most important, pay it forward. The thing that's impressed me the most being here today is to hear how much paying it forward there is in this organization. All of the ambassadors there that are out there paying it forward by educating other people, kudos to you. That is just so incredible. So how can you do this? What's one way, think for yourself, what's one way that I can pay this disease forward? For me, it's doing something like this. I'm a volunteer like everybody else here today. If there's one thing that I can say that makes a difference, wouldn't I be happy to say that? If there's one person that comes up to me afterwards and said, wow, you really get it? That'd be super, but that's not why I do it. I do it because there were people along the way that were always paying something forward to me. Live for the bests. Don't live for the worsts. Live for the bests. For me, it's the best speeches I can give. It's the best classes I can teach. It's the best opportunities to make a difference I can experience. It's the best mother I can be. It's the best friend I can be. Live for your bests. Everybody have those? My body does not define me. Now, I want you to say this one with me. So say, my body does not define me.
My body does not define me.
I define me. Come on, a little more enthusiasm. I define me by who I am, by what I do, by who I love, and who loves me. And there's probably other things, but you define you despite whatever it is that you're going through. So here's a few final tips. Illness is a state of mind. You all agree? It is a state of mind, because remember, you're not your body. Don't be hampered or stopped by your illness. Yes, sometimes you are, but you give it a try, right? So you can sit on the couch and say, I can't do that. Or you can try to do that and see what amount of that you can do. Remember, life gets better. How many know that life gets better? And then maybe it gets worse. And then maybe it gets better. And then maybe it gets worse. I gotta tell you, I was having a really bad day today. Earlier today, I was sick as a dog. Everything hurt. My digestive system was bad. I have Sjogren's just like you do. I was hoping I was going to be okay to get up here tonight. I just kept on coming in here. I kept on listening. I kept on learning. And I would take little breaks and go back to my room, and then I would keep coming. You learn. It gets better. It gets worse. Go with the flow. Have mantras, things that you say to yourself. Like a favorite of mine is, I can handle this. And for me, I say, hey, I've had cancer, I can handle this. Okay. But you can say, I have Sjogren's, I can handle this. Don't let all the little things get to you. And my favorite saying, which I made up a long time ago, was, oh, what the heck, do it anyhow. When people said I couldn't move to New York, I said, oh, what the heck, I'm doing it anyhow. So my next reinvention iteration, people say, well, what are you going to do next, Anne? I don't know. All I want to do right now is I just want to live in every present moment. Because, you know, I don't know what's next. I've had cancer. It could come back in a heartbeat. Or it could come to me from Sjogren's. So I'm going to make every attempt to live in the present moment. And I'm going to have a whooping great time when I do it. In the words of Dr. Seuss, congratulations, today is your day. You're off to great places. You're off and away. You have brains in your head. You have feet in your shoes. You can steer yourself any direction you choose. Now, isn't he the greatest philosopher of our time? I'm going to come back to this. Well, for updates and follow-ups, you can go to my websites, annfry.com, iamathriver.com. There's a piece of paper on your table that talks about many of the tips that I've talked about, and also contact. And on the back side of that, there's an opportunity to register for a 3-part webinar if you want to do that. And you can do that while I'm here this weekend, or you can contact me early in the week. But I just wanted you to know that that's available to you if it's something you'd like to do. And so I thought back, when I was thinking back, it's like, okay, how am I going to close out this talk? I was thinking back how, you know, I had that theme in the beginning where I talked about it wasn't supposed to be like this. And I kept seeing that theme come up in my life. Well, you know, I started thinking, I said, well, you know, maybe it was supposed to be like this. Because the one thing that I can say in reference to everything that I went through, and there's a lot I left out. There's a couple of other little diseases in there. I didn't think you needed all the details. But the one thing I realized is if I hadn't gone through some of these, I wouldn't have learned a whole lot about myself. I wouldn't have known how courageous I was. I wouldn't have known what I was capable of. I wouldn't have been able to ask people for help. I grew immensely through these experiences and am still growing through these experiences. So maybe that's why Plan B came into account, so that I could have a learning experience for everything that I went through when I thought it wasn't supposed to be that way. Thank you so much for your attention.